I know that Louisville is going to be the heavy favorite against Stanford this weekend, but the Cardinals cannot afford to overlook this game.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what is going on, everyone? Welcome into this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This is my fifth year covering the university, third year hosting this show, and I want to take the time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. The Louisville Cardinals back in action after the bye week. They will travel to California to take on the Stanford Cardinal. 3:30 kickoff on the West Coast, 3:30 Eastern time, I should clarify, 12:30 on the West Coast. This is a game that Louisville is going to be a heavy favorite in, but it's not a matchup that the Cardinals can afford to overlook. I'll explain why coming up here shortly. We'll look into just how rough of a season this has been for the Cardinal. Not a great year for Troy Taylor's team in the second year of his tenure. And then we'll discuss the players to watch for the Cardinals offense and defense. Louisville coming off of the bye week after the huge win at Clemson. Jeff Brom's team is 6-3 overall. They have claimed bowl eligibility. They are 4-2 in conference play. Now, look, playoff aspirations and even ACC championship aspirations are seemingly out the window, but you're still playing for pride and to end the season on a good note. Stanford is, outside of the first two games of the season against Austin Peay and Jacksonville State, it on paper should be the easiest game that you play. Yes, it is a road game. Yes, you have to travel across the United States to play that game, but the opponent that you're going up against, it has not been a great 2024 campaign for them. So this should be a game that you win pretty handedly by double digits. You're going to be the heavy favorite in this game. You are ranked once again. Now, granted, understand that this episode is being recorded before the updated AP poll rankings come out. I am currently out of town on a work trip, but so this is all pre-recorded. But everything that we talk about is pretty much up to date, other than the rankings. But Louisville is going to be ranked in this matchup. Stanford, they will also be coming off of a bye. They are 2-7 overall. I think 1-5 in conference play. And I feel like it's sort of eerily similar to last season, right? Louisville had the huge win against Notre Dame. Great momentum boost. And the very next week, they laid an egg and they lost to a Pittsburgh team that ended up with only 3 total wins on the season. Now, I know that things went really south really quick, up in Pittsburgh. For one, Renato Brown had a season-ending injury in warmups, I believe, is when he sustained that injury. So he was out for the game. Jawar Jordan didn't play much in that game. And it was absolutely – it looked like it was raining a ton up in Pittsburgh. So that affected throwing the football. Louisville's defense gave up some big-time plays, and the weather definitely played a factor. Long story short, everything that could have gone wrong for Brom's team definitely went wrong. So it felt like, all of the momentum had been sucked away. Now, Louisville did end up seizing that momentum back when they beat Duke and Virginia Tech and then Virginia and then Miami. But at the time, it was a pretty detrimental loss. And you start to see some parallels, right? I mean, you have the momentum boost against Clemson. You get the first program victory over the Tigers. First time that Clemson has been beaten at home in a night game since 2013 when famous Jameis Winston came to town. in their national championship season with Florida State. The only difference is there was no bye last year. There's the bye this year. So again, you're now having to turn around. And I like this, Kyle Spire from the Third Banner podcast on his guest appearance last week. He mentioned that, I enjoyed Louisville having a bye this upcoming week because it allows the Cardinals to sort of recalibrate and furthermore limit the possibility of just a game to where they sort of sleepwalk through. And then that's a point of emphasis is that no matter how bad an opponent may be, we see this time and time again where a team that's heavily favored ends up sleepwalking early on in the game. And the next thing you know, it's the fourth quarter in a close matchup. And then, forbid that team pulls off the upset, but it does happen. It happened to Louisville last year. So for those sitting here thinking, well, there's no way that Louisville loses to Stanford this year. If you watch Stanford, did you watch Pittsburgh last year? And it seems like Louisville always loses a game that they are 100% not supposed to lose. They have no business of losing. You may say that is the SMU game this year, but SMU is really good. Louisville should have won that game, but SMU is a really good football team. So I don't think that Louisville has had that proverbial trap loss this year. I thought that it could have been Boston College. I thought that it could have been Virginia. Stanford was another game that a lot of people sort of pinpointed, and it wasn't really so much as to the talent on the Stanford team, but more so the setting. You're coming off of a bye. You're traveling, 3 different time zones. You're going from Eastern to Pacific time. And it just feels like, the ingredients are there for Stanford to make things interesting. Now, by all accounts, they shouldn't. Like, Louisville should take care of business, but should and, I guess what I'm trying to say is, shoulda, coulda, woulda. What should happen and what does happen are 2 different entities. So I just don't want to be talking about this game after the fact and, forbid that Louisville either loses this game, knock on wood. I don't think that they will, but we didn't think that Louisville was going to lose to Pittsburgh last year. So all I'm trying to say here is I'm not trying to scare you all. I'm not trying to sound like a pessimist. I'm just trying to say that for as good as that performance was against Clemson, that's great, but that doesn't define the rest of your season. Like there's still 3 games that you have to go out and win. And the first one on paper is the easiest, and it's been the easiest that you will have played in quite some time. But you play the games out on the field. The game is not won on paper. The game is won, in between those hash marks. So if Louisville comes out and handles business, they start scoring early, they don't have any more first quarter, issues like they've had more often than not this year, then I think that Louisville probably runs away with this game and they end up blowing Stanford out. But let's play the devil's advocate. What happens if Louisville has one of those rough first quarters again and Stanford hangs around in this game and the Cardinals sort of keep, having self-inflicted mistakes, and before you know it, it's the second half and it's too close for comfort. I mean, I know it was early on in the season, but Stanford did, beat Syracuse earlier this year. Now they are on a 6-game losing streak, so it really hasn't been the greatest for them. But ultimately, you just never know. So, like I said, I do think that Louisville wins this game. I think that they're going to win this game by double digits, as they should. But I do feel like it is worth bringing up that there are some parallels to last year when you set the table. Big momentum win, followed by a road game against a team that you should handle pretty easily. It didn't happen last year. Only difference this year is that there's the bye week in between. And I do think that does benefit Louisville. Louisville needs to get healthy. They've got some guys banged up. That's going to help the Cardinals. You also, I'm not saying, let the momentum die, but come down emotionally from that win, recalibrate, get ready for Stanford, and use that momentum in the correct way. So again, I am not, going on this monologue to suggest that Louisville is on upset alert. I don't think that they are. I'm just having a discussion because we also didn't think we'd lose to Pittsburgh last year. So let's hope the history doesn't repeat itself in 2 consecutive seasons. I don't think it will. I think Louisville wins this game. And a large part of that is because the 2024 campaign for the Stanford Cardinal has been really rough for Troy Taylor's squad. And I don't think people realize just how rough it's been. We'll break down the current state of Stanford football when we come back on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Cardinal fans having a great time through the month of November, keeping it locked on right here at Game Time, the title sponsor of the show. Cardinal basketball is back. So far, I've used Game Time to get my tickets for the Louisville home games early this season. And when you download the app, you'll realize that there's no need to go anywhere else with all of the features at your fingertips. The all-in pricing feature that you can toggle on, which removes the surprise fees at checkout. You get the panoramic views from your seats. You get some of the best ticket coverage in the industry and much, much more. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Into the second segment of this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Cardinal fans, thanks again for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. I do think that Louisville beats Stanford by double digits. I think that this Cardinals team is starting to find its identity at the right time. And you're going up against an opponent that is just still searching for answers, to say the least. Stanford is currently in the midst of a 6-game losing streak after starting the season out 2-1. They had a close loss to TCU. They beat Cal Poly, and then they went on the road and beat Syracuse. Since then, it has been a rough go. They had one close loss to Wake Forest. Outside of that, it has been blowouts. I'm going to quickly list the last 6 games. At Clemson, 40-14 loss. Virginia Tech at home, 31-7 loss. At Notre Dame, 49-7 loss. SMU at home, 40-10 loss. Wake Forest at home, 27-24 loss. And then at NC State, 59-28 loss. The Stanford offense isn't scoring many points. They haven't scored over 30. But once this season, and they're giving up a ton of points. Like the least amount of points that they've given up in this losing streak is 27. And outside of that, they've given up 40 points 3 times and 59 the other time, the most recent time. This is a Stanford team that in the second year under Troy Taylor, it's been a rough go for a couple different reasons. Now, Troy Taylor coming over from a really successful start to his career at Sacramento State in the Big Sky Conference and FCS. Took over for David Shaw, who had been with the Cardinal in Palo Alto for over a decade, coaching Andrew Luck and company. And first year, took over a program that needed, for lack of better terms, more talent and more depth. They went 3-9 last year. This year, they're 2-7. Now, a lot of that can be contributed to a revolving door at quarterback, a fairly young team, the defense not being all that great, and much, much more. You look across the board, there's not anything that the Stanford Cardinal really do all that well. It's been a rough go. You look at the offensive side, and it all starts out with the carousel and revolving door at quarterback. It seemed like Ashton Daniels was going to be, the go-to guy for the Cardinal, and ultimately hasn't really been able to put it together. He's had only one game this season where he has had more touchdowns than interceptions in a single game, and that came against Cal Poly. Since then, when he has played, he has either had the same amount of touchdowns and interceptions or more interceptions than touchdowns. Now, he does play a factor on the ground. He had over 100-yard game against NC State, but they lost the game pretty handily. So whether it's Ashton Daniels, whether it's Elijah Brown, whether it is Justin Lamson, you name it, the quarterback carousel for Stanford, I think, contributes to that lack of continuity that is hurting this team. So is Daniels going to be the starter for the Cardinal on Saturday against Louisville? We'll see. I know that Elijah Brown is getting some first-team reps. Justin Lamson was the passing leader against NC State. So you have that revolving door at quarterback. You also, there's no surprise that they have the 119th best passing offense in the NCAA. That is the worst in the ACC. Rushing, it's not terrible, but it's definitely not great. Ashton Daniels is the leading rusher with under 500 yards. As a team, they're averaging under 4 yards per carry, 93rd in the country in rushing yards per game. Total offense, 122nd in the country. Not good. It's the second worst in the ACC behind Wake Forest. On third down, they haven't been able to extend drives, 113th in the country in third down conversion, third worst in the ACC. I think it's Wake Forest for sure, but I think Duke is also worse than Stanford in that metric. So this is a game that, Louisville, if they're scoring points, Stanford really isn't built to win a shootout. It all comes down to whether or not Stanford's defense can hold Louisville's offense. And this is where things get even more tricky for Stanford, is that they're giving up a ton of points. Like, Troy Taylor's defense is young, but it's really just not been able to get things going. They're 108th in total defense. That they're giving up about 412.9 yards per game. It's the second worst in the ACC behind Wake Forest. The one thing that they do decently well is defend the run. It's 67th in the country. Look, they actually have a better rushing defense statistically than Louisville does. They're allowing one whole yard less than Louisville is coming into this game. Louisville 145.8, Stanford 144.8, 67th in the country. But it all gets overshadowed by the passing defense. They're giving up a ton of passing yards, 121st in the country, 268.1 yards per game. Third worst in the ACC behind Virginia, and you guessed it, Wake Forest. Wow, it's been a real rough year for Wake Forest. And what makes matters worse for Stanford is that they can't get off the field on third down. 111 in third down defensive conversions, or third down defensive percentage. They're basically 44% of the time they're giving up conversions. 48 of the 108 third down attempts have been conversions against them. That's second worst in the ACC behind Florida State. And to make things even more tough to digest, Stanford is -5 in the turnover margin. That's tied for 103rd in the country. And like the last statistic, it shows that they are the second worst in the ACC, once again, behind Florida State. So any way you slice this, like, the rushing defense is the one thing you look at with this Stanford team and you're like, okay, it's not horrible. So, for a Stanford offense that's struggling to score points and a Stanford defense that is struggling to not give up points, the equation seems pretty straightforward here. If Louisville plays, anywhere close to the level that they're capable of playing, this, by all means, should be a blowout. Now, we understand that sometimes it just doesn't happen that way, but still, again, this should be a game that Louisville wins by scoring over 40 points and giving up less than 30. Like, I hope that this is like the Duke game from a couple of years ago. What was that, 2022? was it 2022 where Malik Cunningham just absolutely tore Duke's defense up, and Louisville ends up winning that game very easily on the road. Like, I'm hoping that that's what we see from this Louisville team. But the Cardinals are going to need to put together a good performance, and they're going to have some of their key players step up in this game. So who are the players to watch for the Cardinals? Well, it starts out in the passing game, and I think that this is where Ja'Cory Brooks could have a field day. We'll discuss when we come back on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Louisville. Card Nation, I hope you've been taking advantage of the opportunities with our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. But in case you're slacking and you haven't, there's incentive for you to stop slacking. New customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same game where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And as I was talking about Louisville fans, I feel like if the Cardinals play to the level, even close to the level in which we know they can, this should be a game that Louisville ends up winning and wins pretty handedly, right? I mean, the offense is explosive. The defense just had their best game of the season on the road against Clemson. So you would hope that this team is able to, not play down to competition and just do what they need to do. So looking at this, I think it's important to discuss who the players to watch for are in this game. I'm not going to be lazy this week and choose Tyler Shuck, but I am going to go with a couple of the stars on this team. And I think it starts out with Ja'Cory Brooks. Ja'Cory Brooks is having perhaps, along with Xavier Restrepo, one of the most impressive seasons for a receiver in the ACC this year. He and Restrepo have been going back and forth. Brooks has 48 receptions for 841 yards and 8 touchdowns. He's averaging a whopping 93.4 yards per game. He has been as good as advertised and then some. With Stanford's defense, passing-wise, 121st in the nation. They're giving up almost 270 yards through the air every single game. I think that one thing that Louisville needs to do is feed the beast. They show that they can't stop the receivers that they're playing, and you look at the receivers that Stanford has played this year. I mean, I think I'm pretty confident in saying that none are of the caliber of Ja'Cory Brooks. Like Ja'Cory Brooks, I mean, KC Concepcion is one that I would say is probably in the same ballpark of Ja'Cory Brooks, but I think Ja'Cory Brooks is the better receiver. So the best receiver that you'll have gone up against this year, I want Louisville to, not necessarily saying that you have to force feed targets, but I want to make sure that you throw his way, in abundance, because I don't think Stanford's going to be able to stop them. Throw it deep. Make Stanford have to, defend deep. Try to take the top off of the defense. I think that this is a game where you could see Ja'Cory Brooks record some season highs. And that's actually that's saying a lot, guys. You look at what Ja'Cory Brooks has done this season. I mean, he's averaging 93 a game. That's averaging. That's not like one game. That is averaging. So looking at the game log, his most receiving yards this season was in the game against Georgia Tech. He had 125. He's eclipsed 100 yards 4 times this season. My goodness. Georgia Tech, SMU, Miami, and Boston College. I'm predicting that he gets over that 100-yard mark again, and I think there's a chance he could be a multiple touchdown recipient in this game. So I think Ja'Cory Brooks is my offensive player to watch for. I think that Louisville's going to try to establish the run game on the ground as they should, but let's get the ball, let's throw the ball and let's open it up and put some points on the board early and force Stanford to have to uncharacteristically have to be able to come down or come back out of a huge deficit. Sorry, not being able to talk, through uncharacteristically. What a weird word that can be to be tripping up over. But nonetheless, we move on. Defensive side of the ball. Look, I mean, Louisville's defense is really balanced. They've been, up and down this year. Linebacker core has had its struggles, but best game of the season for the defense across the board in this one. When you look at the Stanford offense and what Louisville's defense needs to do, I mean, they're 93rd in rushing yards per game. They're 119th in passing offense. They're 122nd in total offense, and they're 113th in third down conversion percentage. So put it this way, Stanford's offense is less than pedestrian. Like, it's just been an issue because the quarterback play has been a revolving door. The rushing attack hasn't been the greatest. So I think I'm going to go with a linebacker here. I'm going to go with TJ Quinn. I think TJ Quinn was one of the better defenders in the game against Clemson. He's had an up and down season thus far. He had 8 tackles against Clemson. Just been sort of a rough go defending mobile quarterbacks. Ashton Daniels has had some issues throwing the football. So it seems like when the passing game is not going to work, he's going to try to get what he can on the ground. So Louisville is going to have to show that they can defend the mobile quarterback again, because I think that Stanford has to rely on, the dual threat to try to win this game. So I look at the linebacker core. We don't know the status of Ben Perry, or at least at the time of this recording, we don't. But I'm not sure if he plays. So that means, guys like Stanquan Clark, Antonio Watts, TJ Quinn are going to have to step up. I'm going to go with TJ Quinn here just because I felt like that game against Clemson might have been his best of the season. It's been a rough season for the Louisville linebacker core, but they do deserve some credit for that performance against Clemson and how well they were able to tackle. Not many missed tackles. They tackled well in space, and they just didn't give much opportunity to either Cade Klubnik or Phil Maffa or any receiver running a short route. So hopefully a successful day at the office for the Louisville defense. I think if TJ Quinn has a big-time game, I think that it would bode well for the Louisville defense. Same with Corey Brooks on the Louisville offense. I want to hear from you all. Who are your players to watch for in this matchup against the Stanford Cardinal? Once again, 3:30 kickoff in Palo Alto, 3:30 Eastern time. Thankfully, it would have really sucked if this was like a night game on the West Coast and like the game doesn't start till 11 p.m. in Louisville. But nonetheless, we don't have to worry about that. Shout out to the ACC for giving us that time slot and not making watching Louisville football miserable from a timing perspective. But nonetheless, you have to work with the situation that you have. So when we come back, final predictions, final discussion of the Stanford game, and much, much more. That's going to wrap up this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. We'll see you right back here very soon. Go Cards.